Okay, so just for like, because I had mentioned this in the previous episode, right? So in Canada, our federal income tax brackets are um, like, let's say if you're on the top tax bracket, so everything over $214,000 and $214,368 is taxed at 33%, right?
Yeah.
So if you made whatever, literally even a dollar more, that dollar is going to be, you're going to get 33 cents taken off
taxed
of that,
off
right?
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for every dollar, you're making 67 cents, right? The question comes to play is that, right? Like the conversation of, is 33% high enough? Is it too high? Is it right? Like, so I think for a lot of people, they would say, well, if you're already making every single year $215,000, that feels like a lot of money, right? So even losing 33% on every single dollar, it's like, oh, well, that feels like, if you're not making that kind of money, you feel justified in being like, well, you're losing 33 cents on the dollar, but like you also have way more discretionary income than anyone else. Yeah. But then you have the flip side of, if you are someone who's making that money, let's say, right, like we always try to look at the arguments of someone who's working really hard but not making a lot of money. There are also people that genuinely do work really, really hard for their jobs,
make a ton of money.
That make a ton of money, right? Obviously, there's your, not that we're going to go into it, right? Like a whatever TikTok star who makes a couple of dances.
Like,
yeah. And you're like, what did you really do to earn that those hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Conventional ideas of like entrepreneurism.
Yeah. Right. So, but if you have the, like you said, that conventional versions of it, it's hard to say to that person that worked really hard that they, one, should have to pay lose a third, right? Because that's what it is. 33% is a third of their salary on those extra dollars, right? Or even ask like the idea of taxing rich people even further, right? Like there's some people that would say we should go to 50%, right? Like after a certain point, right? Like, so whatever, let's say we add another tax bracket and say everything from, I don't know, 300. Yeah. Just, we'll keep it easy. 300,000, everything above that, you're taxed at 50 cents, like 50 cents to the dollar, 50%. Right. But then that's the idea of like, so every hour that you worked, like, or whatever, right? Like the every dollar that you earned extra, it was like you had to do double the time to earn it almost, right?
Yeah.
Because you lost 50% of it, right? And so it is a very difficult situation, right? Because as much as I think you and I don't necessarily have, we're not holding any pity parties for rich people.
No.
but
that's
at the same time,
it's like the difference between people don't realize the difference between a million and a billion.
Yes.
Like a million seconds.
Sorry, that was a really
will happen will happen in like 24 hours, but a billion seconds, like I just hit a billion seconds of existence on this planet like a month ago. It's 32 years.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, but I hit a million seconds probably back when I was like a kid.
Yeah, no, I think it's even crazy like that. I think it's like a million is like within a week, and then like,
something like that, and then like a billion's like 25 years or something. You're like, oh my god!
Like I have heard that before. I think it was
I can't remember, somewhere recently, but yeah, like to your point, it gets sticky that way, right? Like, where do you draw the line, right? Like, like if you're going to be taxed this much, like how much are you making? But like that's where I kind of like, in an ideal world, like, I mean, they're collecting everybody's information and scrutinizing it. So if they're going through that much effort in the first place,
Yeah, so I think what we're kind of getting at, right, is that we wouldn't say that we want an equality-based system. We want an
Correct. Yeah.
equity-based system,
Equity-based system. Yes.
right? So it's not that like
100%.
so
Yeah.
the whatever the
Equality
base
is
tax rate is
usually,
0
yeah.
to $48,000 in Canada, right? So if you make $0 or if you make up to $48,535,
Whatever.
you
Yeah.
pay 15%, right?
Yeah.
But you're saying that like so you and I obviously make more than that amount of money, so we would be paying 15% on that sum of money, right?
Yeah.
But you're saying that if you're someone who maybe only makes $48,000 in the first place, rather than we make thousands upon thousands of dollars more than that,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe that person who only made that $48,000 shouldn't have to pay 15% on that whole amount. It's maybe that they instead have like a different tax bracket that works for them,
For
that
them, yeah.
maybe they're paying the 15% only on $18,000, right?
Dollars,
Like
yeah.
so the $30,000
And then
is
after
not
that, it's like
paid.
12% or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even just the idea of like it then after that point, like it it's almost irrelevant because
Yeah.
if you're only
It
eligible
doesn't
for it because you didn't make enough money.
up to that
If you
point.
start
Yeah.
making, if you somehow move your 48,000 to
Then,
60,000, then you're like everyone else and you pay the like
yeah.
whatever the normal tax rates that are going on, right?
Yeah.
And so on and so forth, right? So it's really looking at the poorest people in society and saying how can we um
Bottom.
allow you to have more money. And I
Yeah.
guess what that really comes back down to, and or maybe kind of maybe switching slightly with gears here, um, is looking at why are we even saying that it would be better for people to have more money in the first place, right? Because the argument could be that it doesn't actually matter how much I tax you as long as I support you at the end of the day, right? So if I'm the government and you make, let's say, $40,000, even if you're losing 15% on that, it shouldn't really matter if at the end of the day you technically actually receive that full 15% and maybe then some back
Mm-hmm.
in government supports, right?
Correct. Now that's going back to like,
Yeah.
that's not the way the world works, unfortunately. It would be nice if it did.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, we know, like, yeah, there's a bit of
Well,
shortcomings in
I
terms of
think it
how the
is hard,
money's
right? Because
allocated. Yeah.
there are some people that are maybe on the poorest levels of society that probably actually do get pretty close to what they chipped in, they get back and then some, right? The
Mm-hmm.
issue is that they're that poor in the first place, right? It's that we haven't said that like a standard of living is this. So
Yeah.
therefore, right? Like I think a case in point, right? There are people like we live in a welfare state, so to speak, right? Like so there are people who do not work at all
Mm-hmm.
that make a basic
Income.
uh,
Yeah.
income. Yeah, thank you. Right, and it's not because necessarily they're whatever someone with special needs that can't like their
Work.
exceptionalities don't allow them to
Yeah.
do that. It's someone that for whatever other reasons,
Can't.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe like
Mental
uh,
issues. Yeah.
yeah,
Sometimes
certain
just
things that are not
because.
like your typical like yeah, like I don't know, maybe you got in trouble with the law and now you can't get a
Yeah.
job,
Yeah.
right? um Whatever it may be, right? Like so there are people that are on welfare um that those people technically like not, I know this sounds like obviously harsh, but they put nothing into the system. So
Yeah.
and then there are other people that put maybe they make $20,000 and they put a little bit into the system, but then they're also eligible for all of these other government assistant things,
Bonuses
right?
and yeah.
Like just recently, the federal government added, um, like what were the healthcare thing? Like I think it's like dental and eye stuff
Yeah. Something like that.
for people who have a household income of less than whatever. Oh, actually, no. Sorry. It's specifically for children, though, if I remember
that's
correctly.
right. Yeah, I
Right.
think it's, yeah.
But nevertheless, right? Because that's the other thing with taxes that I don't think this time around we really chatted about this, but the other issue with taxes as a whole, and not really taxes as a whole, but just government support as a whole, is that it affects everyone differently because we don't all access the system the same way, right? You and
Yeah.
I are not necessarily accessing hospitals. You don't have a child. I do. Like, I don't have a child in school, but you don't have a child right now. So you're not going to be accessing the school systems.
Correct. Yeah.
Not technically yet either, but but eventually my daughter will access the school system, right?
Yeah.
We all use the roads, and you're like, okay, that's one that you can be like, everyone utilizes it, right?
Water
But you and
treatment, all
I
that kind of
don't use
stuff.
public transit. We're lucky enough we have our
Correct.
own
Yeah.
vehicles,
Yeah.
but our public transits are built around tax dollars, right? So
Yeah.
that does get into a very, I don't know if like confusing is even the right word, but like an interesting situation to how you should look at government paying for, like, our government's doing a good job, right? I think the basic answer would be and should be no. But to say that they're not doing things for some people, right? Like, I think that that's a harder one to get around, right? Because there are people that are benefiting from the social assistance of things. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because that leads back to that argument of why some people feel that you should just really privatize everything. Like, I will tax you less, and then you can take your money and go into the private system and take care of yourself, right? Like, that's really, in the United States, that's that mentality around, like, kind of Medicare, right? Is this idea that you go to the hospital, you pay what you want, or like what you need, and then you go on your own way. I'm going to tax you less. You have to pay your own medical bills, right?
Yeah.
In comparison, or like education could be the same way, right? I'm not going to fund schools. Instead, there will be all these schools that exist. You pay a fee to attend those schools, and based off of what you can afford, you go to such and such school, right? Um, and that's where I think it is tough to fully answer that question, even though I think the things that they're doing right, they are great. But I think both of us would say that there's a lot of misspending of things where it's just
Yes.
like, why did you put money into that? Like,
Yeah.
who thought that
Which,
was a good
that's
idea?
probably the most obvious part for most
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Right. Who signed off on this? Right. Where it's
That
like the
stupid rubber duck.
short-sightedness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. So, and that, I think that that's a difficult conversation around taxes, right? Should we pay more? Should we pay less? We kind of touched about it right away, and I think that that's where the conversation immediately leads towards, right?
Yeah.
The issue around where people feel that governments are not upholding their end of the bargain when it comes to taxes. So it's easy for me to say we should pay more or we should pay less or whatever, but that almost doesn't, it's almost hard to even have that conversation because the agreement in the first place has been, I don't want to say like voided, but like it hasn't been like upheld, right?
Yeah.
So how can I say we should pay more taxes when we don't spend our taxes
correctly
well in the first place?
Yeah.
But also, how should I say we should pay less taxes when I know full well that, like, as much as the conservative mindset, the right leaning in terms of taxes, right? Liberal taxes. I know that that's a very confusing term. Not liberals in the sense of politics. Liberals in the sense of economics. Would say that you should have like free market You should not have government involved with any of those things. You should leave money to the people, and they can decide what they're going to spend that money on, right? So conservative economics are like, if you have a conservative mindset, right? Like, so the Conservative Party of Canada, or if you're a Republican in the United States, you would believe
It's
in
a little bit
liberal
different
economics
between the two of them in each country, but yeah.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like, if you're right on the spectrum in terms of politics, if you want to even look at it like that, you would have liberal economic policies is what you would believe in. Very confusing that they do it that way, and that's that's how it sounds. But yeah, it is hard, because when you have that mindset of that pure freedom, it shouldn't be very hard for people to realize that if you're on anywhere close to the fringe of society of not being able to afford things, you're not going to be able to afford things when you have to do it on your own, right? The purchasing power that the government is able to do, not only from like the fact that they are able to purchase things on large scale, but the government is able to go on into debt different than you and I or a business can go into debt, right?
Yeah.
The government does not have the same kind of constraints in that way. But it really does come back to this idea of, is the government giving all that they could with the money that they've taken in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And I think if we're going to have, like, I know we've been trying to fight the urge of having this conversation, but I know you've brought it up a bit, and I've definitely tried to fight it. But the conversation around what an ideal society is, that's when I think you could say what the hypothetical of, hey, if you had a government that was providing proper health care, right? There wasn't any issues with beds or the speediness of it, right?
Delivery, whatever. Yeah.
The justice system, right? That you had quality justice services, or fire and ambulance services, right? That you had roads that were maintained well, that you had schools that had resources to better educate.
Yeah, all the obvious social
right?
services.
Like, yeah, if you had all those things, water treatments, right? Like, because obviously there are lots of places, both in Canada and as well as like the United States, that you hear all the time about places that have poor water treatments, right? If those things were all provided,
yeah,
what would so for me, if you told me that all of these things were going to be taken care of, right? Again, recognizing that I might not be utilizing every single thing in my current state of life.
Yeah.
But if I gave you that hypothetical, that dream world scenario, that these things were all provided, would you be fine paying more taxes?
Depends how much, but I don't see, like, if it's provided, I can negotiate for sure.
Yeah, so let's just say they're not going to leave you with nothing, right? Because the other thing is that okay, this is going to seem like very confusing in some ways. But if you took your job, your current salary, and objectively looked at it as where it is on the scale of jobs, right? In terms of salary, like how much you earn, right? Not looking at taxes, not looking at like what you take home, just what the employer says, this is what you're kind of worth, right? Relative to other jobs, right? Like, I don't know, what's the most basic job in the world, right? Like,
whatever. It's not.
I don't know, like,
think of anything.
yeah. Think of what it may be, right?
Yeah.
That you would have in a relative scale, right? Like, you would have.
So what are you saying though? Like, how much more am I being taxed? Because I'm already being taxed a third of my income now.
And that's
so
what I'm saying,
all
though.
Of those
like,
services were provided to me, and my rent was somehow paid with enough money for me to do what I wanted to do after the fact, then yes.
Well, so okay, but that's how can I look at this?
Because that's the
Right?
thing, like services only go so far. Like people have ambitions and shit they want to do in their lives, and that's where their personal income comes into play. And I think for most people,
Yeah,
the
but I
majority
guess
of their
I guess
lives,
my
that's
hard
more
part is
important
I
than the
can't.
services.
It's hard for me to phrase this, and the reason I'll explain why. So you and I, we both know I make more money than you at my job, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in theory, I'm able to do more outside of my basic expenses,
Yeah.
right? I have more discretionary income.
Yeah.
There are people that make less money than you that have less discretionary income. There is a point that you would have to make the argument of, is this job so far at the bottom of the totem pole that there is no discretionary income? Let's say you make, I don't know, right? Like I'm just going to throw this number out there.
Yeah.
Let's say you make $35,000.
Yeah.
Let's say 100% of your money is taxed, right? I'm going a little bit
Yeah.
ridiculous with this, but let's just say you lose 100% of it, but your like kind of food, shelter, right? Like go down the like basic necessities of life.
Mm.
You're not worried about like if you're going to get 3 meals a day, right? You're not worried like for you
I don't know,
and your
just that sounds like
family.
dangerously like totalitarian in a sense of like, oh, we'll just provide everything for you. I don't think that's what drives people. Like people want to go and get stuff for themselves.
So you would say that you're better off in a world where you have a family that has that situation, that they don't necessarily, maybe those kids don't get breakfast, they don't get lunch, they not sure if they get dinner that night, that their, I don't know, their apartment building that they live in is like super run down, like
Mm-hmm.
below a standard that we're like, oh my god, that's like
Yeah.
these the rust is coming through on the pipes like for the water, or right, like go down the like kind of horrible
Tell me about
situations
that
of
one.
our world, right?
Yeah.
um which are not really far, right? Like I work in the education system. I can tell you right now, I know that there are families that are in this situation, right?
Oh
The
yeah.
whole reason why a lot of schools have created
I live in a building where there's people like
yeah, yeah,
that.
right, right,
I
like
don't have
so
to go to work. I just have to walk out my front door.
yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, right, ignoring the drive factor, because I agree with you. I think that you should want to, like, I'm the type of person, if you paid for every single thing for me, I'm still going to choose to work because, like, yes, yeah, right. But there are also going to be people that are like, I'll, if I could just freeload off the system, I'll freeload off the system, right? Right. So you the oh, we lost Jordan. Maybe I'll pause for a second here. Oh, I think he's coming back. There you are. Yeah. All right. Well, no. That's fine. Your participation. It says now that you're not recording. So, a little bit of technical difficulties, but we are back. So I was just in the middle of saying to you, right? If we ignored, and I know that this is sometimes difficult, but ignore the idea that, like, there are some people that want to do more for their lives. There are other people that aren't doing as much to benefit themselves, right?
Yeah, besides
If
that.
you just looked at it purely from the standpoint of, you have some people who right now can't afford things in life, right? are you saying, in your opinion, that you think that they are better off in that situation where they're kind of currently at, rather than what you said, more of like you felt like it was a bit of a tyranny or authoritarian type of regime that if you tax them 100%, right? If you had people that made very little income, tax them 100%, but said all of your basic necessities are provided for you, you said to me that would be kind of like tyranny or whatever word. I forget what you said, but this is the issues with our technical difficulties. How much time has elapsed between us talking? But well, yeah, like, so what are your thoughts?
Like, yeah, people that are like, because we're saying like there's the people that like are on welfare, for instance, and like they can't like work.
Sure.
So in that case, that that makes complete sense to me, because like how else can they, you know what I mean? Like,
well, if you're on welfare, you're not making income, right?
Income, yeah.
I mean, or you're making super small amounts.
But if you're at like the lowest level of like income that you could possibly make, like consider like the poverty line or whatever.
Okay.
Like that makes sense to me.
That you could say that. So you're saying that, so for someone who makes what you classify as the poverty line, because I'd have to look up what statistically is considered that, but let's just say whatever that is, right? Let's say it's, you make $20,000. I don't know. I'm just throwing out a number here, right?
Yeah.
If that's considered what the poverty line is, are you kind of clarifying your point in the sense that you would say that it's fine to tax them 100%, but then say, here's everything for you?
Yes.
Okay, because your original thing, that was what I was trying to get at.
No, right? I guess there was a miscommunication there, because I was thinking you were like, I was looking at it differently, but no, now I'm listening to the question again.
Yeah, now, so like, because I'll like, obviously for our listeners, they're probably like, well, you just said this, but it's the idea that, so you and I, on our current incomes in our current society, do have discretionary income, right? Yes, meaning that you have money that is left over after you kind of pay for your basic necessities. If you want to, whatever, buy a video game, you want to go out to get food, you want to buy a present for someone, whatever, right? Like, like whatever it may be, you have the ability to do that, right? There are people in this world that have jobs that don't allow for any discretionary income.
It's right? all,
And there's some people that don't even have, sorry, not only do they not have discretionary income, but they also don't have the ability to pay for their bare necessities. And what my question would be to you is that if you had a government that legitimately took care of your basic needs, would you be fine if you worked a job that would be considered
like that? Yeah.
That could only pay for your bare necessities of life, or less than that, you actually have 100% of that kind of taken away.
Yeah, because then it gives people opportunity to, start pursuing stuff. Like, they're not worried about spending all their time just trying to survive.
Yeah, you don't have to, you're not thinking about struggling, like if 1 week you didn't make enough money or something like that.
As long as you go and do your part, it's covered, right? So that's no, I don't think that's a terrible idea at all.
So with that being said, let's just say, based off of your salary, I don't know, what do you think percentage of your salary is like discretionary income? Like 5%, 10%, 20%? What are we talking about?
I guess at the moment, like 10 to 15 range.
Okay, so then let's say
that will change in time too, right? So
I'm again, it doesn't really matter what the number is. I just needed you to give me a number
off the top of my head.
So let's just say 15% is what.
Yeah.
So if I said to you that, like 85% of your salary was taxed, but you had a government that provided for all of society, like whatever they needed, right? You would say that you would be okay with a system like that?
Yeah, I mean,
because
if
it
I
would
was
take
happy
that
with the
away from.
15%, yeah.
Well, so
Like,
this is the big
yeah.
thing, right? You don't have a choice necessarily. Okay, that's maybe a weird way to phrase it. Based off of the current system, right? Your job is deemed that it's X amount valuable, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of the equation of of work is that, like, obviously things like inflation and whatever like affect things, but you are paid like, so we pay a fry cook at McDonald's a certain wage because we deem that that job is only worth so much in society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on top of the like aspect of like, okay, that's the wage that they get, it also translates to, okay, this is what you can do, how much you can kind of participate economically within society, right?
Yeah.
So your job is saying that uh whatever, you have the ability to take care of your needs, and then you have uh whatever, a few things here and there that you get to spend on discretionarily, right?
Yeah.
Like how you mentioned earlier, like Warhammer, right? If you wanted to buy a Warhammer, those are expensive models. They don't
Yeah.
really serve any other purpose than your own enjoyment. Just
I
like
was
if
gonna
you
say
want to
that's like
go
the
get a
top tier
drink.
of my luxury list that
Well,
goes
yeah,
up
I
with
was
like a
gonna say,
cruise. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, fair enough. Warhammer is definitely not a cheap one, but right, like in the same way, if you and I chose to go out to the bar and have a drink, right?
Yeah.
Not a necessity at any capacity
Yeah,
in our
like I
life.
could go and spend $60 and it probably shouldn't, but I'm not gonna like lose sleep if I do either, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm
right.
not
So
gonna I'm not gonna miss my rent or go
yeah,
hungry
you're
kind of
not
thing.
putting it
Yeah.
on credit and trying to like delay payments or something like that just to be
Yeah.
able to enjoy yourself. So your job has said, okay, yeah, you're allowed to have a little bit of enjoyment based off of what we pay you, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to get at, right? Like where um if the only dollar value you had was basically,
Your expenditures.
well, the only money that you actually got to see was the stuff that you wanted to kind of like
That's what I
get to
mean. Yeah.
spend your
Like the
money
stuff
for,
you
like the
wanted.
fun side of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, would you be okay with that? And I know that that's like I think a very tricky
Yeah.
situation,
In a
right? Like,
perfect world, probably. Yeah.
and I think that that's fair. I think the issue, I think some people would tell you or say, um, is that removes all sense of choice,
Well, yeah, that's
right?
my biggest hang up with it, right? Is like your time is still your time at the end of the day.
What do you mean
But
by that?
like
Like
well, like in
relative
terms of
to?
your labor,
Yeah, I guess what
right?
I'm
So
trying to ask is like, and these are extreme hypotheticals that don't like it's
yeah.
it's not to necessarily say like that's what the reality that you
No, but
necessarily
if our
want.
government was
It's
like the Federation in Star Trek, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
yeah, if you actually believed in
Yeah,
that
like
they're
if
not
that was
trying
how it
to
was
mess with you.
practiced in theory, like yeah, or sorry, if that theory was put into practice that way, like yeah, like do what you guys need to do. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and then just
Okay.
give me what I need to for like that and that what oh my god.
In that sense, yeah, yeah. No, I know what
In
you're
that
saying.
scenario, yeah.
Yep. No, and I think that I hope that others would also feel that way. Not necessarily looking at what governments are currently like, but if you had a government that actually genuinely cared about you, that understood what people need to survive in life, um, and then provided those things, that people would be fine with a more collectivist style of living, right? Um, because, but there's a lot of kind of qualifying questions before that ever becomes like a reality, right?
Yeah, but
Um,
just hypothetically, right? So
on the basis of, yeah,
yeah.
if you could have a situation, right? Because that's really kind of getting back down to the idea of, should you raise taxes, should you lower taxes, should you, right? It really comes back to the heart of this idea of, should you as an individual get to choose everything that you're purchasing? Right? Whether it means that you can afford like less or more type of thing. Well, arguably you'd probably afford less if it's on your own, but you would have the choice. Or would you have like technically speaking slightly less choice, but you overall could afford more, right? That's really at the heart of the conversation when you're looking at taxes in general, right? We can look at individual taxes, whether it's like we've been talking a lot about income taxes earlier. We talked about sales tax, like consumer taxes, right? You can look at the nitty gritty of those things, but I guess kind of relating back to that reasons for why we have taxes in the first place, asking ourselves, what kind of general world scenario do you want? Do you want a little bit more, but a little less choice? Or do you want like full choice, but maybe you're not getting as much out of the system?
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think it's like a simple answer. Yes or no.
I'm sure everyone's going to come from a slightly different, but it'd be interesting, just to see what other people's takes on it would be. Because I feel like you get a broad spectrum of stuff from a wide range of like skills, right?
100%. And I think that there's the other aspect that kind of comes into play is that if you're focusing on this from more of an individualistic standpoint, you may look at your own personal finances and say one way or the other, right? If you are not making a lot of money, you're like, sure, sign me up for a system that's going to take care of me. And I'm not going to have to be like, where's my next meal coming from? Where's my, like, am I going to pay the water bill? Right. Yeah, exactly. Like you're going to say, sure. And then you have the flip side. If you have someone who's like, well, no, I work really hard for my job. Like I went to school or I worked up the ranks within the company and I make a lot of money and I take care of myself. So why should I be shelling out more for like less choice? But also not only that, but the reality is in a system that has taxes for the purposes of socially taking care of each other, you naturally are going to be like how we still are today. We pay into things that we don't necessarily have the benefit of, right? If you're extremely wealthy, you still pay taxes, right? And you are not going to utilize whatever 80% of the things that government spend taxes on, right? So if that's the case, oh my gosh, we've lost Jordan again. Technical issues once again. But hopefully that makes sense for everyone, right? This idea that if we have a situation where you could pay more into taxes and then society as a whole gets more, again, qualifying that government is able to spend that money properly or maybe more transparently, right? With a little bit more of your say, especially when we live in a democracy, right? Would you agree with a system that is like that? Or are you still on the fence of like, you know what, no matter what, I always think that taxes should be as little as possible because I will figure out my own way. Right? It's an interesting conversation. Hopefully it's one that you guys, at least if you haven't thought about it before, maybe you're thinking about it now that we're talking about it today. But hopefully next time we won't have as many technical issues as well, and we can finish a podcast without any interruptions. But like I said, hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully you've gotten a sense of not only just like the ideas around why we have taxes in the first place, but also kind of really the intricacies of taxes and how there's so many moving parts. There's so many different ways that you can tax people. There's questions around what you're spending that tax dollars on, right? Case in point, in Canada, we spend money on healthcare. In the United States, they don't do that as much, right? They've only recently started to do those things. there's so many different ways to look at these things, but it is kind of at the core of what you psychologically feel is important for your life.